Hey everybody, welcome to PC Perspective. We have a special event for you guys today. We are going to be looking at an entire series of Z97 motherboards from ASUS, demoing some of the specific software features, going over some of the hardware features, and of course, to bring all that information to us, we brought JJ back.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So we have a lot of stuff to get to.
Like always, we always have a ton to go through, especially when it's ASUS. You know that you're already just like, okay, how am I going to try to distill that all down and fit that within that time allotment?
When it's like, well, how many motherboard models are you guys releasing for this chipset? Well, it's pretty high up there, and we get the boxes with all the boards. All right, let's get to it. Let's talk about some of what we're looking at here. So this is a whole new series based on the Z97 chipset from Intel. This is a new chipset. It has some specific features of its own. You guys have done a lot of work on specific features for your platforms, for different series of boards, whether it be the mainstream, the ROG, the TUF, the workstation. Definitely. We're going to go through all of that. And if you are watching on the live stream, we're going to give away a couple of motherboards as well, so you want to pay attention for the process for that. If you have questions, we're going to answer some questions as we go in the chat room. If you're at pcper.com/live, our chat room in there is a account called Questions, which is our own Scott, who's in there fielding questions, and he'll help collect them for us for when we actually get to the Q&A section. So we'll do that. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Let's start with mainstream, right? And this is biggest selling product of the Z97, Z87 line, and I assume Z97 line will be this series.
Yeah, that's a tough question. The segmentation, the segmentation series have actually done really well for us, especially keyboards within the ROG series and the TUF series of motherboards. But definitely, I mean, overall, I think the way that we interpret our design philosophy and the focus of how we're designing feature set and functionality, the mainstream series is kind of our first visible footprint that we always want to have out there, as far as saying when you consider an ASUS board, this sets kind of the hallmark, the trend for what the expectation is, and a lot of times as we've talked about in the past, the non-negotiable feature sets that you're going to see unilaterally across all their segmentational series boards. I like that
are
going to be on there. Yeah.
The non-negotiable feature set. I like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the way that we kind of, I guess we view it, right? I mean, multiple generations back, we started incorporating key features, whether they were things like, the UEFI consistency amongst the boards, even the quality of the componentry that was integrating, fan control consistency, a lot of that stuff where we said, regardless of which board you buy, we didn't want to ever alienate that type of class of feature. Now, what would happen is you enter into different segmentation boards, whether it's going to be mainstream, whether it's going to be with TUF or ROG, you're going to start to have more specialized functions and features, which will serve that audience that much more specifically, right? As opposed to with the mainstream, really we kind of gear it towards it's going to fit everybody. It's the jack of all trades, and normally, the tagline is jack of all trades, master of none. But what we really try to do is we try to have it actually be jack of all trades and really good at everything. We definitely don't want to say that it's not the master of none, because we put a huge amount of work. So whether you want to be able to create a system that's centered around gaming, whether it's general productivity, whether it's content creation, or whether it's a mix and match of the two, whether it's a little bit more media center oriented or anything along those lines, we try to make sure that the experience that you're going to ultimately get out of that board, regardless of whether it's an A, it's a deluxe, it's a pro, is going to fit in line with how we've developed the board from top to bottom. All right,
well, let's start with, I guess, probably the best place to start is a general overview of what the chipset is, what kind of differences it brings kind of universally. It's still the same socket that we saw with the Z87 line of motherboards, so it is processor compatible with all the currently existing Haswell parts.
Correct.
I can say that it will be capable of supporting future Haswell parts,
yeah, so
refresh parts.
We can state that it is going to be fully compatible with the upcoming Devil Canyon series of CPUs that will be available. But for you guys right now that are looking at CPUs, of course, there's Haswell Refresh that is right now pretty much coming out. Those are going to be fully compatible, and of course, your current Haswell parts like your 4670 or 4770K, that's drop-in compatible. So pretty much the way you want to think about it, regardless of what CPU you're essentially going to be buying, you're okay if you're buying a Z97 series motherboard right now. But the bigger...
That's good. That's not always been the case for Intel. In fact, not very often at all has that been the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been pretty good actually though for the last couple of generations.
77 and 87.
Yeah, I mean even X79 where you went from Sandy Bridge E, you got Ivy Bridge E support. IVB, so I think it's been pretty good compared to sometimes in the past you had clear socket chains and it was always you had to make a change to get the new CPU. But a lot of you guys are always asking, well, what's really the benefit from a chipset level, right? And for us, we always embrace the chipset because we want to get the best performance out of it. But in all actuality, I think even for the last couple of generations, we look at it as what can we bring outside of that, because really the experiences are not going to really fundamentally be tied into the chipset itself. Because if we take a look at it from the core specifications, it's going to be very consistent. I mean, there hasn't been any changes to the PCH, to the number of PCIe lanes that are driven by the CPU, or any of those things overall. There's some really minor little things, like technically the chipset has full enabled support for RST for like PCIe SSD devices. So that's officially part of the option ROM management software. But that goes in line with the type of storage devices you're going to see later part of the year, like Q3, Q4. You'll see partners coming out with specialized types of PCIe SSD solutions, or inherent PCIe-based SSD solutions, where most of you guys right now, when you take a look at storage devices, it's using a SATA controller, right? Not a native PCIe-based controller.
Even those that are plugging into a PCI Express slot are using SATA controllers.
Exactly. So you have native PCIe-based solutions, but they're right now really only found in the enterprise segmentation of the market, not in the consumer enthusiast part of the market. So Intel has made that something that's now available as part of the chipset, but that's more kind of a software firmware level kind of adjustment. There's been a little bit of tweaking to the USB 3. It's called USB 3 stream support, but this is a very minor update overall for most of you guys. You won't really see, it'll be kind of like a transparent change. It just helps to improve some performance and some initialization functionality, but nothing huge. So when we take a look at it from a just spec to spec perspective, if you were to do your classic like Newegg or Amazon compare to cart and kind of look at it, you wouldn't see almost fundamentally a difference. It's going to look the same.
What do we think about the SATA Express side of things?
So that's really interesting because
I'll hold this up because there's probably a lot of people that maybe have never seen what a SATA Express actual channel looks like. It's two SATA connections and then a third connection that is used for...
well, it's there for power, and it's also there, depending on how it's incorporated, it actually can be for signal clock. So there's a couple of things that kind of get tied into it, but overall, it's going to essentially be a connection that'll look very unique in terms of the actual cable that's utilized for the drive. And unlike a normal serial ATA, that entire connection would be utilized for one SATA Express-based solution. Versus with a serial ATA cable, it's just one header. But it's fully backwards compatible with serial ATA. The interesting thing for this generation is that Intel has given flexibility to how the motherboard vendor can leverage how they're integrating storage in. So technically SATA Express, it's not part of the chipset specification. What they've actually done from the storage side is made sure more so official spec implementation for M.2. So M.2 can be officially tied into the chipset, but it gets actually a little bit complicated because with the two types of M.2 devices you have on the market, you have both SATA and you have PCIe. Now if you use SATA, SATA is supported on the Intel chipset level, but it's collaid in with the PCH. So technically, if you use an M.2 SATA-based solution on the motherboard, it's going to be collaid into the PCH, meaning you'll lose that PCH port.
So you wouldn't, if you had a physical port on the motherboard, you wouldn't be able to use it.
Yeah, it would be lost because you're using it. And then, for us, we want to give a lot of flexibility to that, but we see less reason for you guys as enthusiasts to probably consider M.2 SATA-based solutions, because technically from a performance standpoint, it's the same as a normal 2.5-inch SSD. Also, the controller diversity is going to be far less. There's not going to be as many options. And cost to capacity is also probably still a little bit better on a standard 2.5-inch SSD. Where it gets more interesting, though, of course, is M.2 when you have it linked in directly into the PCI Express bus, where you can have up to by 2 Express interconnects. So with that, you can offer much faster throughput. So you'll begin to see that type of solutions available from the storage vendors in the marketplace. And so that's something that's part of the chipset. So that's probably, I'd say, the most exciting part, is that you have that kind of official support integrated in. But otherwise, we've tried to just look at really the experiences that you guys have continued to give us feedback on, saying, we want even better fan controls, we want more usability improvements, and all the things that we're going to talk about is what we focused on. But for you guys that are wondering, what's the big difference on Z87 to Z97? For the most part, there isn't a huge difference. It's going to be pretty much the same level of functionality, which is great, because I don't think anybody was really arguing about the overall platform in itself. You might say, I wish I had more PCIe lanes, but as we know, that's why X79 exists. So if you really want that level of connectivity, you can jump up to that.
Now, I know from my talks with Intel, that's something they showed us at GDC, is if you want Devil's Canyon support, you have to have a Z97 product. It will not be backwards compatible with Z87. That's something they told us at GDC. So there is that kind of advantage towards looking towards the next generation of motherboards.
That is correct.
So okay, let's get into then what it is that you guys have done
Sure.
for the boards around the Z97 chipset for this release that differentiate it. So where do you want to start?
Okay, so yeah, so we've got right here just the Pro, and while we're going to be kind of just giving an overall topology overview on what the Pro is bringing to the table, like always, a lot of what we're going to be talking about in terms of the core functions and features are really going to be unilaterally across that wide range of our mainstream series. So down to the Dash A, all the way up to the Deluxe, even the Dash I Plus, so that little mini ITX board that we have on the board there, is going to really have the majority of what we talk about is going to exist on all these boards. Really, it's just going to maybe be minor points of differentiation, such as the Dash A doesn't come with integrated wireless. So of course that's going to be a differentiation, but it's a spec differentiation versus, let's say, an experience-based differentiation. So I guess first and foremost, we don't actually spend a huge amount of time talking about component quality on the motherboards, because historically we've always felt in our position that we're going to put premium quality design on our boards. But for you guys that always do wonder about it, what are we doing in this space? You're getting very good quality components. We've talked about in the past how we've always led in advanced type of implementations for power delivery. So even though you still have the Fiver, and the Fiver digitally controls pretty much all that, we still maintain a dual digital design. So we have a digital PWM on the motherboard for both the CPU and the VRM assembly, as well as for the DRAM. Now the question might be, well, why do you keep it on there if you have the Fiver? Well, one, you still actually have to have that conversion process in terms of the current coming in from the power supply to the CPU, because the Fiber can't translate that. But in addition to that, it's more so about the management capability that you have for the VRM assembly. So we can control more advanced options such as OCP, or the phase response policy, or the phase loading policy. There's a lot of options that we have that have to do with the power delivery and how it reacts to, let's say, your CPU versus controlling how the CPU's, let's say, managing voltage and other parameters. So that's where having that digital control implementation is just giving us more granularity and control to be able to tune the board for either efficiency or for performance, however you want to tweak it. And on the DRAM side, the Fiver exclusively handles power delivery and control for the CPU. So the digital power delivery for the DRAM is still left entirely on the motherboard side of the fence.
So that's still...
Correct. Even though you have a memory controller inside the CPU, power and delivery control isn't handled, as of now, by the Fiver.
Still based on the motherboard.
Exactly. That might change, who knows, in the future, but as of right now, that's also why. And the same type of options that we have for managing the VRM for the CPU are the same type of actually options that we have for managing the DRAM. So we can address like overcurrent protection, phase response policies, and a lot of more specific items that, once again, it's ultimately about either tuning it towards efficiency or tuning it towards performance. Your call. So that's a kind of unilateral kind of implementation you're going to pretty much see on everything from the Dash A to whatever other series boards you're going to see, all going to have that.
Are there any changes in that power delivery from the A to the Deluxe, or is it?
That's actually a great point, and that brings us to a bigger one that we've talked about in the past too when it comes to overclocking. And right now, once again, I just want to reset that message that we have always delivered in the past, that you can buy Dash A, you can buy Hero, you can buy Z97, you can buy Z97 WS. The overclocking experience across every single one of them is going to be exactly the same. That means all of them are going to do 4.6, 4.7, 4.8 gigahertz. They'll all do DDR3 2400. It won't matter. Now, some boards get tuned and validated to even a little bit more aggressive frequencies, like let's say like our Maximus 7 Hero. It's been validated at DDR3 3300 versus, like the Pro is only done, I think, 3000. Okay, but in reality, all you guys are going to have platform that we've designed from a board level power delivery, thermal dissipation marker, all things to be able to ensure a great OC experience. The differentiation is going to come into play and what your experience is about how you pursue overclocking. And what I mean by that is some people care a little bit more about thermal performance than other people. And so a Z97-A will entirely be able to do a 47.7K at 4.8, assuming your margin is there within the CPU.
With the processor
and
itself.
Assuming you have good enough cooling to handle that, right? But the difference will be is that these VRM heat sinks, they might run maybe 5 to 8, maybe 10C hotter, right, than you would have on the Pro or the Deluxe heat sinks, right? And so that might maybe mean maybe your internal chassis has to have a little bit better airflow, or maybe you're just okay running it a little bit hotter. It doesn't mean that it's a question that the board won't be able to achieve that result. It just comes into question that I feel more comfortable with maybe a board that has a little bit better thermal performance. And that's where the differentiator will come into play, is that the Dash A, it's going to have a very good quality heatsink. It's got fin dissipation. It covers all the MOSFETs, all the key components, right? But the Pro will have a beefier heatsink. And then if we were to look at the Deluxe, like if you just want to show that Pro there as an example, Ryan.
This one.
Yeah, so we've got the Pro there. That's a very large, it's a very dense heatsink. It's going to give us really good thermal performance. But if we were to compare this here to the Deluxe board, you'll see that the Deluxe board even actually has a little bit of a larger one, and it also has a heat pipe assembly that goes even to a secondary portion. So you know, if we just talk about thermal efficiency, it's just like buying, you know, like a Noctua, you know, U12S, right, which is going to be a big, really good cooler, but then buying a Noctua U14S, right? It's the same thing. One's just bigger, and it's going to get you a little bit better thermal performance.
Okay.
So that's really where the differentiation comes into play. Now, in terms of the components, we do make evolutionary progressions on the boards as you evolve them. So on the Dash A, you're going to get very good quality, you know, 5K rated capacitors, good quality MOSFETs, very good quality drivers. If you go up to something like the Pro here, this goes up to actually 10K rated capacitors, which we used to only offer on the TUF and the ROG series motherboards. And we go to even higher grade molded alloy inductors that have higher amperage output. But all of that ultimately translates to what I said before. It just comes down to that you're extending out the headroom capability and the thermal efficiency characteristics. And the Deluxe will even go a little bit higher end. It'll have really, really high grade inductors on there. So these are about like 40 amps. And then you have the Deluxe is like 60. So it's just giving you a little bit more room. And that's just a preference you as a user. You know, you ask yourself and you go, if I feel okay with that, then I feel okay with it. And sometimes it's kind of a free upgrade because sometimes you might buy the other board, let's say a Deluxe, because you want the additional SATA ports or the more SATA Express, but by virtue, you'll also get those other elements upgraded.
Okay.
So that just to make that clear for you guys, don't worry about overclocking. It's unilaterally consistent.
Okay.
So moving past that kind of section, if we always talk about a board, which is in this top end where we've got the VRM and the power componentry, one of the next ones that I think is really important is going to be the overall connectivity when it comes to fans. So, you know, for a very long period of time now, we've really been focusing on continuing to evolve fan control functionality. And for this generation, we're definitely maintaining that focus. So you're going to pretty much see on everything from the Z97-A and above, every single header is going to be 4-pin. And that's pretty much the same as previous generations. The Pro, for instance, here has 6 4-pin fan headers.
I'm looking for them all right now. We've got
So you've
CPU
got
fan.
2 here, and then 1 here, and another down there, and then you'll have another one over in that section. So they're also placed really in the key areas that you would want, and that's something that we sensibly do. Sometimes you'll see vendors, and they'll kind of just throw fan headers where it's easiest to lay them out, but not necessarily where it's best to have them, right? Because, you know, when you're building, right, sometimes it's like, how come there isn't a fan header there where, like, I actually needed to be in relation to where my chassis is, right?
Right.
You know, so
where that fan was always going to sit in your case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we try to really keep that in mind, keep that in consideration. Now, in the previous generation, we enabled some really advanced level of control to be able to give users 3-pin and 4-pin control support for every single header. But for this generation, we wanted to really kind of blow it out of the water. So we've been working on this for a very long period of time, but now what we've given you the ability to do is per every single one of these fan headers, we can manually control the output signal. So what that means is we can assign it to either be a pure DC signal or we can assign it to be a pure PWM signal. Now the advantage of this gets really exciting because if you have the ability to assign PWM output capability to any header, you can effectively have more headers than what you really have on the motherboard. So as an example, let's say you have like a Corsair Carbide 400R or something like that, or you've got an NZXT Source 530. Both of those can support upwards of 7 chassis fans. But if the board has only 6 fan headers, what do? Well, normally you'd have to buy like a fan bay controller, or you'd have to add in something else. It's not very elegant because then you have 2 different solutions with 2 different ways to tune the fans.
Right.
But now what we could do is, let's say we have that back fan header right here, right? So let's say like chassis fan header 3. Well, you can use something like this, which this is just a normal PWM fan splitter cable.
Okay.
So we can go ahead and plug that cable into that chassis fan header, and as you see right there, then you got 4 more headers. And all those fans are going to actually
this just plugs into the motherboard.
That plugs into the motherboard.
And then you have 4
additional fans that can be connected, and then that's driven by your power supply. So your power supply is what provides the power to the fan, but all those fans will receive the control signal from the motherboard.
Okay.
And so now we essentially can go from, let's say, our motherboard having only 6 fan headers to 10 fan headers, essentially. So this is really awesome because you get to maintain
now
that.
these are all receiving the same signal.
That's right, the same signal. So a good way to do this would you imagine, like I said, like that Source 530, you have 3 front intake fans, right? That's a perfect situation where you would want to have those all receive the same exact control signal. Or like the Corsair, it can do up to like 4 fans on the side panel. Or you could do 2 fans on the side panel. But in grouped arrays like that, where you're fine having that same exact control signal, guess what? You can do that. And you could do that for even multiple headers, or even have mixed and matched. This level of control and flexibility is really unheard of in the motherboard industry. Just have this range of flexibility, being able to manage and tune your fans and being able to configure them and extend them out in this way is something that's extremely impressive.
Neat. Yeah.
In addition to that, the really cool part is, like I said, unilaterally consistent feature set. So even if we go down to our entry-level Z97-8, it has this class of fan controls. I feel confident, and I'm positive that if you guys even compare this to competitive solutions in the marketplace, even the top-of-the-line motherboards from a vendor, if we go A and B, fan control on the most expensive motherboard from a competitor versus our entry-level board, the fan controls will not be in the same field. And that's what we mean by when we talk about experience. We've really tried to drive the development of the feature set to align with users having the best experience possible. But even evolving past that, we wanted to make the fan controls even better than that. That in itself, I think, is pretty awesome because that took actually some hardware layout work and some UEFI and some firmware work.
Yeah.
But we even did more. So we looked at also leveraging some of the features that we had developed for our Sabertooth series of motherboards under the TUF line, which had multiple sensors. So if you remember, for a long time, the TUF series has had thermal radar. So we had all these like sensors on the motherboard to track temperatures, and we can do different things with those sensors. So we've leveraged some of that and put that onto the channel series as well as our other series of motherboards, where now we can map different temperature inputs to different headers. So what I mean by that is, historically what would happen is that when you have your CPU installed, the CPU and the PECI information, the DTS information, is pretty much what causes all the fans to ramp, right? That's not necessarily bad, but also it's not necessarily the way that it should be if you think about it, because in some situations, maybe you're not doing a huge amount of CPU work, but you're having your storage array receive a huge amount of data, right? And so maybe you want your actual storage array to actually have improved airflow, even though your CPU isn't necessarily ramping, right? So in that situation, we have the ability to be able to assign different temperature inputs. So you have CPU, which will always respond to the CPU. So when you plug into CPU and CPU op, that will only react to the CPU temperature.
Okay.
But let's say you plug into the chassis fan, well, you could map that to the VRM. You can map that to the PCH. You could even map that to an optional temp sensor, such as this little guy right here. So if you show them that, that's a little optional temp sensor that you could plug into the board. You could put on top of your hard drive. You could put on top of your SSD. You could put it on the back of your graphics card.
Okay.
You can put it anywhere you want that it has to have that be essentially an input mechanism for where the fan is responding to based on that temperature.
How many of these can the board support?
So it depends actually on the board. For our channel series, the Deluxe and the Pro will both feature one optional temp sensor. The Dash A will not feature it. That's where there's a difference. But the Dash A will still have at minimum the ability to map to those other temperatures.
To the temperature sensors that are already on.
They're already on the board, such as motherboard temperature, VRM temperature, and PCH temperature. So as a whole, you still have a huge now degree of flexibility of really making sure that the way your system is cooled and configured is really specific to exactly how you want to do it. So we think that when you look at Fan Expert 3, it's unquestionably the most advanced type of fan control. So there's not even a fan control on the market that does any of this stuff. And you throw in what we've done in the last generation, where we did the full automatic fan calibration per every header.
Yeah, very cool.
Being able to rename every single header, and you put that all together, and now it's just like, I don't know that you could really ask for more. In terms of what's possible.
Somebody will.
Oh, we're sure.
We'll think of something.
And we've actually even got other things that we're looking to introduce, even with what we've done, to show that, we think that there's even more areas that we can improve upon. But I think if you think about this class of functionality, to even get remotely close to this, you'd have to buy at least like about almost like a $50 fan bay controller that has like optional temp sensors to map to different stuff. And even then, you don't get full DC and PWM output capability. You can't rename the headers. It doesn't do fan calibration. So the value proposition for us, we feel, is extremely high.
Very cool.
And we'll show later on in the UEFI even other improvements that we've done, where that fan calibration that used to be exclusive to the operating system, we've introduced that even inside the UEFI environment. So you're going to be able to do full fan calibration, software independent inside the UEFI environment, with even also having a graphical fan too.
How big has the UEFI gotten? File size?
It's still actually about the same size. The really hard part for us right now is more so managing UEFI consistency across all the boards. And right now, this is actually where we'd love to hear some of your guys' feedback. We're at right now, I'd say, a precipice in a decision-making process where we want to make some really big advances in the UEFI, but we've had a really fundamental focus to try to keep the UEFI consistent on every board. You buy an H97 board, you buy Z97, the UEFI is consistent across everything. We're at this kind of decision that to make that, we're not going to necessarily make larger ROM sizes for lower end boards where it may not necessarily make sense for.
Okay.
And if that's going to hold us back from being able to innovate on this performance segmentation where we could even do cooler stuff.
If it's holding you back from adding features to the ROG line.
Yeah, or a Pro or Deluxe or any of these boards, that's something that we're making. Now, you guys are, of course, always going to be vocal about this type of stuff, and we'd love to try to put every feature on even most lowest end boards, but there's always going to be that cost delineation that has to be considered.
Sure.
So with that, you know, if you guys are okay seeing that, or let's say we treat the Z97-A as being the cutoff, and we put in the newest, most advanced features there because we have more size capacity, and on lower end boards we maybe have like, you know, still our outstanding current UEFI, but maybe just not all the super awesome stuff, which also we think realistically you won't use as much in those lower end segmentations.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's something we'd love to see feedback from you guys on.
Okay.
So that's FanExpert 3. So I think really awesome, and keep in mind, like I said, regardless of whatever board we're going to talk about from now on, whether it's going to be TUF, ROG, or WS, all of them have that FanExpert 3 fan control functionality. Even the little mini ITX board, which I think is awesome because that board, it's 3 fan headers, which is cool already on a mini ITX board, but keep in mind having the ability to do that same thing where you can do this PWM fan splitter cable on that little board is pretty awesome. Because then even if you go to some of these bigger mini ITX chassis, which sometimes have like 4 fans, or where you're doing like the dual double rad closed loop bar cooling solutions, you still have the flexibility of having more fan control flexibility on how you work with the board.
Cool.
So continuing on in terms of what we've done here, we've never really, I'd say, been the biggest fan of onboard switches because like we've talked about in the past, I feel that once you put a chassis inside of a case, once you put a motherboard inside of a chassis or inside of a case, you can't use onboard buttons. So we've always wanted to try to prioritize the features either in the UEFI or in the software, but we have definitely had them. And so for this generation, if we take a look here, and maybe you can show them, Ryan, we've got, of course, still the TPU and the EPU switches that are on the motherboard.
Where are they at on here?
Right down here.
There we go.
So that's going to give you one-touch hardware-based overclocking. So, you know, if they want to be able to easily overclock your system, you know, 4.2, 4.3 gigahertz, just a flip of a switch when you're first setting up your system and you're good to go. Or the EPU switches in the other direction, right? It's not going to affect performance. It's just going to undervolt the CPU. So it'll bring down temperatures and power consumption a little bit. So it's pick your option as far as how you want to go. But a new switch on here is going to be right here, which is XMP. We're still finding in our market surveys of the community that over 50% of you guys are not enabling XMP profiles. So to be able to make the process easier, we've now have an actual XMP switch on the motherboard. So as easily as just being able to install your memory and flip that switch in the on position, it will automatically enable the XMP profile for you. So it makes it a very simple process. But keep in mind, once again, for us kind of looking at it full circle, later we'll show in our auto-tuning software, we're maintaining the benefit that if you run auto-tuning will also automatically enable your XMP profile for you as well. So once again, to kind of follow that lineage of whether it's in the hardware level or whether it's in the OS level, we try to give you both levels of that functionality so that you have the best experience possible.
Okay.
So moving on from there, for the DRAM, we talked about it a little bit in the past. You know, every generation, ASUS always prides itself on topology and layout and kind of tuning things out. It's one of the things that we feel that is really the biggest strengths that we have for the company. So we have even further refined the T-topology design for this generation. And that's just because we're seeing changes in the DRAM ecosystem, where you're now starting to see even larger densities, right? Where it's becoming more common to now get users to adopt 8 gigabyte DIMM configurations, such as 2 8 gig DIMMs to achieve 16 gigabytes. Where early in Z87, you actually saw 4x4 kits were more common. But now actually on pricing, sometimes the pricing on a 2 8 gig DIMM kit will be cheaper than a set of 4x4 gig DIMMs. But what users actually should understand is that every time you change density, it actually changes the way that the MRC and topology and resistance and a lot of different things works. So we have to go back and fine tune aspects to how things work to be able to get the best compatibility and performance out of it. So for this generation, it's the most forward thinking in terms of that. So we're putting the foot forward, and it's actually going to maybe have a little bit lower performance and lower density multi-channel population than it would have in 2-gen population, but higher densities. Overall, for most of you guys, you'll never see this because we're talking about margins that exist at much higher frequencies. So probably above, I'd say at least 2600, where you really would start to see a drop-off in terms of maybe some performance or some scaling, where Z87 might have a little bit actually more headroom with certain types of lower density DIMMs versus Z97 having higher headroom with higher density but less channel population. But it's just one of those things that you just, hopefully we feel that you guys feel comfortable in knowing that we're paying that attention so that as the DIMMs progress, because that's the way users don't think about this stuff, but the market will force you to either get a benefit for this or not get a benefit, because when you're going to go to buy the memory, you're going to buy whatever
you're gonna buy
is
what's less expensive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Or you're going to buy what's also market ready, right? As vendors are continuing to produce memory, they'll pull
True.
back from production on 4x4, and they'll focus more on what makes sense for them from a yield and all that stuff.
Okay.
So that's something that you're also going to see on the motherboards. And in this whole section, we're going to keep things that a lot of times are going to be of consistent, such as our Q design. So Q design as a whole, if we just highlight a couple of things, are going to be, of course, the Q DIMM, which is going to be the single latch connection to make it really easy to be able to install or remove memory. The Q slot, which of course is the wider slot to allow you to go ahead and insert or remove, of course, your graphics cards. We've got the Q connectors, which you're very familiar with. We've had forever, which are those quick connectors for the bottom front headers. That make things
still my favorite motherboard feature.
That still make things super easy. We still have, of course, the 4-point QLED technology, which is going to be for the CPU.
Yep.
You have one for the CPU. There'll be one for the DRAM. There'll one be for the GPU, and then there'll be one for the boot device.
Right here.
So those will essentially all turn on when your system is going through its post-process. And if it was to lock on, maybe let's say memory, maybe your DIMM has an initialization problem, maybe it's not fully seated. There's different issues,
the
but
light would stop there.
yeah, it's easier than sometimes looking at a debug code and you see like 57. And it's like, I don't know what 57 means.
Yeah.
And you have to either crank up the manual or open up,
Whatever
Google or
happened
Bing,
to
right?
the idea of it just talking to you, telling you, screaming out the error in some kind of robotic voice?
Actually, this is another, this is a really good point that you bring up. If you will remember it because you've been reviewing boards for a long time.
Yeah.
But we used to have actually, you remember the AI series of motherboards when they were called AI? We actually remember we did have a talking BIOS.
It was really weird.
And exactly.
It was really kind of weird. It was creepy.
But we took it out because people actually said that it was kind of weird. But in this era of Cortana and Siri and Google Now, are you maybe more willing to have that if you
if it would say if boot problem
exactly
in DIMM channel A or something like that would be incredibly useful information.
Yeah, so we have that. I mean, right now, of course, on some of we'll see that there's a really cool feature in the WS that does something really cool that we call Q logging, which will even make the troubleshooting process easier. But if you guys actually would be okay hearing voices again coming out from your motherboard when it turns on, right? Because remember, this could happen like in the middle of the night, 12 o'clock at night, you reboot your computer and all of a sudden it says your computer is okay. Whatever it might be, if you guys are okay with that, let us know. We're willing to go back to the drawing board on that one, but we at the same time don't want to freak anybody out.
I love the idea of what you guys are doing with some of the notification stuff we'll talk about in a little bit. I think that's a good place for that as well.
To start. Yeah, I definitely agree.
So.
And I think, and the good thing is that with a lot of these APIs being available, as we'll talk about and stuff like that, we can really start to make some of this stuff really interesting. So we've still maintained, of course, all those Q design elements. And getting back to the board, let's just focus here on some of the connectivity points.
Okay.
So on this Pro, you're going to have dual front USB 3. So you've got your standard front USB 3 header there, and then you've got one on the bottom of the board. For newer chassis where you're starting to see 2 front USB 3 sets of ports on there,
I'm a fan of that.
They're going to be good to go. Or for the ones that have only 2, but maybe you want to have like a high-speed USB card reader to copy over data or things like that, you have that flexibility of mashing, setting it up however you like.
Okay.
And of course, like all our previous boards, we still maintain the USB Charger Plus, so you can quick charge your smartphone or your tablet even if your system's off.
That is on specific port?
That's actually pretty mappable almost through any USB 3 port, but it won't work on multiple ports all at the same time. So in that respect, as far as how it gets initialized is still restrictive.
Okay.
You also, of course, have our USB 3 boost technology to be able to improve the performance for different types of USB flash drives or high-speed external SSDs. So that's also another awesome feature. Now, looking at the storage, this is where I think a lot of you guys are going to have questions on because things get kind of complicated, but they're also really flexible for this generation. You've got pretty much every connection you could want. So even down to the Z87-A, the Z87-A will have M.2, SATA Express, and PCH-based connectivity. And that's the same for the Pro as well as the Deluxe. But speaking here to the Pro, you can see that we've got SATA Express. So of course that's going to be much faster throughput, 10 gigabits versus the 6 gigabits that you have on the PCH-based connection. And if you're not going to be using SATA Express, then you can use these 2 ports as normal SATA 6G ports. So for you guys that are just going to run a standard mechanical or a SATA 60 SSD, it's backwards compatible, no issues there. Now, I forgot to actually bring it with me, but maybe we can plug a picture in for you guys later on. You guys can see it. But we are going to have a Hyper Express module breakout box. So the Hyper Express module will be a small little 2.5-inch light device where you'll be able to put in either 2 sets of M-SATA-based SSDs or M.2-based SSDs. It will hardware RAID them, and then you can just directly connect that to that. So if you want to take advantage of SATA Express-based performance in a simple way, we'll have that little module coming very shortly to the market. So for users that want to take advantage of that. From there, you've got your standard PCH-based SATA 6G. You've got an add-on AS Media 1061. And
That's the black ports here.
Yeah, the different colors. So we maintain still that consistency of knowing which ones are different, just like in the DRAM. And that's I guess that's something that we didn't talk about. Maybe if we want to go to a little bit, pull a little bit wider out. That's the new. That's actually a really big thing. Our ID is different, right?
That's right.
The ID, we maintain gold like we had in the previous generation, but we've gone with what we feel is a more kind of a, I'd say, clean and modern design with softer kind of accents. So the gold has been toned down a little bit, but still anodized.
We called it on our podcast last night. This was the classy gold finish.
I think it looks really nice.
To a component.
And when you complement it with a semi-almost monochromatic color accenting, so we have black and dark gray for the DRAM, for the PCIe, and for the SATA, I think it actually looks really nice.
I agree.
And it's going to go really well because black, which you can get in every component, will naturally complement this, right? But moving back there to the storage, the M.2 here, this guy, I think this is what a lot of you guys are going to be interested in. The Pro has this. Now keep in mind that one thing that's going to be tricky, as I noted, is that M.2 will currently come in 2 flavors. You've got M.2 SATA and you have M.2 PCIe. Now the Pro fully supports both. We can do SATA or we can do PCIe, but if you use SATA, it will come at the expense of you losing PCH-based connectivity.
1 or 2 ports?
One port, yes. As if you use PCIe, there's still the potential benefit because you're pulling PCIe lanes from something, but overall you're going to get much greater throughput.
So how do you support both?
It's based off
the magic behind that.
It's actually based on quick switching. So we essentially, on the board, there's logic, and essentially there's quick switches that allow us to reroute the actual interconnect signal.
And you can do that. I mean, the technology will be able to detect whether or not this is a SATA controller or a native PCIe.
Yeah, that's all handled
with plugging in. You don't have to go in and set anything.
User doesn't need to do anything. This is entirely transparent to you guys. You don't need to set or configure any parameter inside the board. It will know which one you do. But just for you guys, just keep that in mind. I don't want you to go out there and buy something and think, especially because some of the messaging might message more M.2 PCIe performance and think, oh, I can go right now in Newegg or Amazon and buy like Intel's drive or Crucial's drive, which are based off SATA controllers. It'll be the same performance as a current SATA-based drive. So that's just something to keep in mind. One other point for SATA Express is that while there will even be other companies that, of course, have SATA Express on their motherboards, as of right now, we've spent more effort than anybody else, and we're currently the only ones that have SRIS-based support. And this is a very important function because it requires essentially the clock signal to be synchronized to be able to ensure consistent performance. Now, this is something, it's not hardware specific, it is part of the firmware and UEFI tuning aspect, and almost kind of like option ROM, if you want to think about it in the way SATA operation protocol works. But without this, the SATA Express device may not have the optimal compatibility, so it may not always fully recognize. It may potentially have degraded performance. So this is very important, almost like in the same way some of you guys, when you think about like trim support in the past where there was like the controller supported trim, you want to think about it in this same class. So just keep that in mind, but if you're considering an ASUS motherboard, nothing to worry about. It's going to be 100% there and you're good to go.
All right.
So moving past that, if we head over into this section of the motherboard, we've got some pretty awesome stuff that we've done here. So historically, ASUS has always had a big focus on audio. And we led the industry really in a lot of our audio designs. And with ROG, of course, we were the first to implement the isolated audio path. And as we've seen, of course, some competitors have copied this isolated audio path design. But what we do here at ASUS is we try to really figure out how the experience can be improved upon beyond just even hardware specification. So this board, along with the Dash A, the Pro, and the Deluxe, all do feature, though, the isolated audio path design, like we have on ROG. So that means that the PCB and the left and right stereo signal channels are independent of the rest of the motherboard. We have, of course, a full shielding to the audio codec, and we have those, of course, nice Nichicon audio-grade capacitors, and we have an operational amplifier. But that would pretty much be, run for the mill when compared to our ROG boards, and even to a degree, we feel that we're doing better than competitors, but you could say maybe spec comparative to a competitor solution.
Okay.
But what we've done here to be able to give you guys a better experience is something pretty cool. So we co-worked with the DTS Sound Group. And when we worked with them, we asked them to actually help us customize actually full Oreo profiles for different types of playback mediums. So for you guys that are out there, of course, you can have either in-ear monitors, you can have over-the-ear headphones, or you can have standard desktop speakers. So we'll show a little bit later on in the demo, but what will happen is when you plug in either to the line level out or to the front headphone connection, you'll actually be prompted with a little pop-up box, and it will show you a picture of either in-ear headphones, over-the-ear headphones, or desktop speakers. And when you select that, it will automatically switch to an optimized Oreo profile that's been designed for those type of drivers. In addition to that, we also have new specific audio profiles for music, movies, and games that are linked into that. Now, all of this is going to occur on a pretty much automatic basis, but like always, if you guys prefer not to have those, you can of course go to default properties. But coming from somebody that is, I feel, a genuine audiophile, I've got our Zonar Essence 3. I've got, right now probably over, I have 2 different floor standing speakers. I have professional monitors on my desktop, and I've got like 20 headphones.
Maybe some.
And I'm a big audio guy. I've actually been very impressed with the profiles that we worked on the DTS group with.
Okay.
And I feel that regardless of whether you're watching music, movies, or games, try them out. I think you guys are actually going to be pleasantly surprised by the improvement that you can have in actually a wide range of that content. So that's a new feature that we've introduced for this generation. Now, moving over to our back I/O connectivity, you pretty much are present with everything you'd expect. You've got USB 3, you've got gigabit LAN. For the Pro specifically, we've upgraded from the previous generation of 802.11n to 802.11ac with Bluetooth 4.0. And we also have gone ahead and upgraded the actual the software package for network priority control. So we maintain our focus on Intel NICs, and we'll talk a little bit more on ROG why we're still maintaining Intel NIC over, let's say, competitive solutions like Killer. And part of that comes from just we feel it's the best performance, best management, and overall the best interoperability. But we are now using a new program replacing our network iControl software called TurboLAN. But TurboLAN has the advantage compared to the previous generation that it's network controller agnostic. So we don't care. You can prioritize your packets for voice over IP, for streaming, for gaming, for whatever you want, whether it's on the Intel NIC or whether it's on the wireless, or even if you add a PCIe adapter or a USB wireless adapter, it doesn't matter. You can control it for whatever network solution
last year
that you
I know
want.
it was specific to the hardwired.
Yeah, it was only for
adapter.
the Intel network port.
Yep.
And unlike ROG did have software that allowed you to map to any network controller. But ROG though has done some really cool stuff that we'll talk later on about.
Right.
Outside of that, we of course keep other functions like you would expect, like our USB BIOS flashback technology, which of course gives you that ability to update or recover the UEFI chip with no CPU, no memory, no graphics card, right? You just need standby power. It's a really awesome feature that we have on our boards that I think from a recovery or ease of use standpoint is really great. And that speaks to, another point that's still keep in mind, guys, from a cost standpoint, we don't cut the corners in that regard where this is a non-soldered solution. So that means that even in absolute worst case scenario, if that chip was to have a failure and you couldn't post, you could still contact our service team. We could send you out the replacement. You could drop it in there. Whereas many competitors, to cost down, they're just soldering the chips onto the motherboard. So it's a little bit more limiting in that solution. So we've got some other things in terms of the software suite, but we'll cover those independently. So moving on to just kind of some of the things that I guess connect here with the board. We've got some really cool functionality that we're giving you in terms of expanding the support. So I know, Ryan, this is something you love, which is the Thunderbolt 2 card.
Big fan of this.
So on pretty much all the ASUS Z97 boards, you'll be able to drop in Thunderbolt 2 as easily as just being able to purchase this guy. You drop it into the bottom PCH linked by 16 physical slot, because it does have to be linked in the PCH. That's an Intel requirement. But then that will give you Thunderbolt 2 performance. So we think this is the best solution for you guys that don't want to have to take the initial cost hit of paying for Thunderbolt if you don't immediately need it. But if you want to take the benefit of it.
How much was this if you buy it separately?
There's actually two versions of it. There's a single port and then there's a dual port. Single port, I believe, is $40, and I think the dual port is $70.
And so all you do for connectivity-wise is you're running from the DisplayPort out on the motherboard into this.
Yes, and that's only if you want to pass
So it's not required?
Not required. Only required if you want to output video signal from the iGPU. Yeah, but if you want to just use this from a pure storage standpoint, you just need the internal pin cable as well as the add-in card, and that's it. So it's a really awesome solution just to be able to give you guys Thunderbolt.
Cool.
Now, in addition to that, we've got this cool little box, which we unveiled last year, but we've made advances to, and we have the NFC Express box. So the NFC Express box is cool because first off, it's a USB 3 hub. So you'll see that you plug it into a USB 3 port, but you get 2 ports back. So that's a cool little plus.
That's a plus.
But in addition to that, you've got a lot of functionality. So I can just show you guys here just some of the functions, and we'll maybe see if we demo some a little bit later. But if you take a look here, we've got Windows logon support. So that just means if you were to pass over, your mobile phone or device or whatever like that, you could just automatically log into your system. No password, no login information is required.
So you don't have to necessarily set it on there.
It depends actually on what we've noticed is different NFC radio implementations have different proximity kind of initialization.
Some of them you can sit next to it, some of them have to be on it.
Exactly. Some we've noticed that you can be within like an inch and you can kind of do more swipe over. Some of them you physically want to rest it over, but it will depending on the implementation for NFC on the phone or the tablet. We've got quick launch, which is really cool because you can go ahead and map multiple applications to be essentially linked to a profile. So once again, if you pass that device over or hold it over there, you could launch, let's say, your web browser, your email client, your streaming client. Any number of programs could all launch at one time.
Now in this diagram, you have that little yellow thing next to the controller. That's an NFC key. Does it come with this?
Yes. So if you buy the actual NFC box by itself, it will come with an NFC fob. So if you're one of those guys that maybe hasn't updated some of their tech to have NFC yet installed into it, we still want to be able to give you NFC functionality so you have an NFC fob.
All right.
You can do remote desktop. So you can go ahead and initialize that function. The cool thing for remote desktop for this generation too is we've made it extranet and internet capable. So if you're outside your home on your mobile device, as long as you've got cellular or Wi-Fi based connection, you can also do full remote management to your system as well. Photo Express is really awesome, especially with a lot of new cameras having so much better sensors, better camera technology in them. You're snapping a lot of pictures. You can do full wireless transfer, so you can just go ahead and transfer over your latest set of photos wirelessly. Just go ahead and hold it over the box and it'll transfer your photos for you. You can do video to go, and Bluetooth pairing are brand new for this generation. They're really cool, so you have the ability to stream video from your mobile device to the desktop. And Bluetooth pairing is essentially taking that, it pairs it up with the Bluetooth onto the desktop and allows you to stream any audio that you have playing back off of that mobile device to desktop speakers. Or desktop headphones if you have those connected.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it's all about just kind of maintaining that ecosystem.
Are there specific players you have to use for that to work? Like, do you have to, or does it, how does that, like what applications in Windows are being used?
Since the audio actually passes through to an audio-specific manager that's part of the OS layer, technically it should work with any audio application that's linked into the audio driver. But from our compatibility test right now, we found, of course, default Windows Media works really well. We're still doing interoperability with VLC and with FooBar because those are popular kind of enthusiast clients. And if there's going to be patching, we'll be looking at updating patches for that. So that gives you some more functionality. Like I said, I think just shows kind of the ecosystem of support. And one of the last ones is another cool one where you have Qi wireless charging support. So there'll be another little box here. You can plug it either into the USB 3 port, or there will be a standard AC adapter, which would then just make it general. But
so it is spelled QI.
Yes.
And it is pronounced Qi.
Yes.
Because last night on the podcast, I was like, is it Qi? Yeah. Okay, so Qi.
Yeah.
So it's a USB device that is doing wireless charging. Now, what kind of amperage?
It's actually, that's a little bit tricky because part of that is also dependent on how the device is set up, and even sometimes whether there's plating or not, different types of plating. I would say that compared to if you were to have, most people don't have this, but if you were to have what's called an unfiltered cable, so a cable that only does power versus power and data, pretty much almost any cable that you normally get though only does, does both. It does data and power. You have
Sure.
to buy a special cable that does literally just power, which would be generally up to like 2 amps. In that situation, I would say it's going to charge up to, on normal devices, about 50% as fast to maybe to as about 60% as fast.
Okay.
So you are going to look at a little bit less time, but it's just that convenience, of course, of being able to
Yeah.
just tap it onto something and know that it's charging and you're good to go.
And even if your phone doesn't support this technology,
Yeah, that's actually something I think we can show them right here. If you want to pop the back off of this, this is something you guys, if you don't know, if you've got a pretty popular phone, all you need to do is just, I think you're on the sides there.
Yeah.
So you can pick one of these little guys up, and you can get them from like Newegg or Amazon for phones. They have different ones. Some are back plates. Some are actually just inserts that go directly on the back of like the battery, and they make a pin contact.
Yep.
But on average, you're usually looking somewhere between like $5 to $12. So it's pretty cheap just to be able to add wireless charging to your phone.
Okay, cool.
So overall, even for you guys that don't necessarily have this, there's an easy way for you probably to be able to take advantage of it. So outside of that, we've done even a lot more, but those are going to probably be covered more within the demos, because we've made huge overhauls to the audio tuning technology, which I think was already pretty awesome, but we've gone back and I think even made it exponentially more awesome.
Exponentially, that's a large claim.
Yeah, I personally, I think, and I think you guys, JJ is very prideful, and I could be a little bit boastful as far as what I like, but I really feel that we've done some really awesome stuff for this audio tuning generation. We're going to show some cool stuff that we've done also in the UEFI and some of the other software packages like Media Streamer, which is really cool, and the push notice function that we've also gone ahead and introduced. But as a whole, I think you take a lot of this in. What we've talked about are things that we've progressed and maintained from previous generations, kept them here consistent, and then also continued to evolve them. So even for you guys that thought, about certain features in the past, I definitely always recommend go back and reevaluate what your expectation is from the board. And I think that's the biggest thing. Ryan gets it all the time, whether it's going to be on the podcast and the forums or people emailing, but people always ask, what should I get? And I think sometimes the bigger question isn't just what you should get, but what is it you want from an experience standpoint? I think that's really how we're pursuing motherboard development, is don't ask yourself just what I should buy, because a lot of times if you just ask yourself what you should buy, it usually gets distilled down to pure pricing, or it gets distilled down to a spec. And a spec a lot of times won't tell you necessarily the experience, right? So like I said, the fan controls is a really good example of this, where you could buy another motherboard on the market, and it could be $10 less than our motherboard. And it will say, I have 5 fan headers. But does that mean that actually every fan header can be not only one uniquely controlled, but can every single one control 3-pin and 4-pin fans? Can I map the temperatures, right? Because I get people like that, they talk to me at our PC DIY website, and they're like, hey, I didn't realize I connected my 5 fans, but 3 of these won't work. They're all just running at full speed, because they didn't realize that control functionality isn't present for that board.
Gotcha.
So that's what I mean. Just ask about the experience, or like we'll talk about, I think with auto tuning, it's pretty cool that it's system specific overclocking. Like I love these TPU switches, they're really easy, but you know what? If you ask me, it's really inferior compared to what we've done on our auto technologies, because that's system specific to your CPU, your cooling, your memory, even your line level quality. Not a lot of people consider this, but you've been in enough demos to know from system to system that if you move your computer from one place to another, you can have the same exact hardware and you can have a different experience, because line level electrical quality can actually affect overclocking.
I just thought it was bad luck.
Whether it's gremlins in the machine or whatever it might be, that's the benefit of having a technology that's system specific. Is that it doesn't matter what hardware you have, or where it is, it's going to always be conditionally specific to your hardware setup.
All right. If you guys are watching live, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with our demos. If you're watching this after the fact, on demand, on YouTube, or whatever fashion, the next video in the playlist, we'll get into the demos. We're going to look at Auto-Tune, which you are obviously excited about.
Yep.
Fan Expert. We're going to go into the UEFI, Wi-Fi Go, and some of that type of stuff as well. So we'll be right back.